Hello, Craig Childress here. You made it with me for this far. Congratulations. So in this video, I'm going to rehabilitate the 8 symptoms of Richard Gardner, or at least most of the 8 symptoms, and describe where they come from, what he's picking up on. There is a pathology here. I know this pathology, transgenerational transmission of attachment trauma. It's an attachment pathology, it's trauma pathology, we've got personality, but I know what the pathology is, and I know what its symptom features are. And so I recognize what Gardner's going for with his 8 symptoms, but he just did an awful job of it. And what diagnosis is, just to explain it, diagnosis is the application of standard and established constructs and principles to a set of symptoms. So, for example, a medical diagnosis, you go in, there's disease, and there's various definitions of different diseases. And so you come in with a set of symptoms, and the medical professional, the physician, applies all these different models of diseases to match your symptoms. Okay, so it's the application of standard and established knowledge to a set of symptoms. That's diagnosis. You don't just go around making up new pathologies. You know, a child doesn't like carrots. He's refusing to eat the carrots. It's a carrot rejection syndrome. The child rejects carrots for weak and frivolous reasons. The child shows a lack of ambivalence about carrots. The child believes that the rejection of their carrots isn't motivated by the other kids at school. They think it's an independent thinker kind of thing. The child has no guilt about eating carrots or not liking carrots. So, you just don't go around making up pathology. You constrain yourself to standard and established constructs and principles. And Gardner didn't do that. He thought he was special and he could go off and make up new forms of pathology. And when you do that, it just gets you into a mess. And sure enough, it has. It's gotten into a mess. So what are the 8 Gardner symptoms really? What is he looking for with these? So campaign of denigration, that's the hatred side of things. That anger is situational. So there's a cue for anger. There's a trigger for anger. Hatred is chronic anger. Okay, so what he's picking up on is the chronic anger nature of this. And the reason the child maintains that chronic anger is because the anger is suppressing the attachment system. And so the child has to keep a chronic state of anger on their attachment system. Otherwise, their attachment system is going to want to bond to the parent. They love the parent. And so the anger is keeping a suppression on it. So that's what Gardner's picking up, is that hatred quality, the absence of stimulus control. That's what ABPA would be over on, is looking at the behavior change sequence and looking at the cue, the absence of the cue for the child's anger. Okay, that's this first symptom. For weak and frivolous reasons, that's the delusional belief. Yeah, it's delusional. It's encapsulated persecutory delusion. That's what he's picking up on. It's much better, though, if we go with the affirmative diagnosis of an encapsulated persecutory delusion. There's definitions for what that is. There's a whole literature surrounding that. It's a much more solid way to say, for weak and frivolous reasons, it's a delusion. Okay, that's the definition of weak and frivolous reasons in clinical psychology is a delusion. So let's call it a delusion. It's a persecutory delusion. Let's be specific. The splitting, lack of ambivalence, let's call it splitting. Okay, because if we call it splitting, we also get the reflexive support for the other parent, because that's the idealization half of the splitting. So we have the idealization of one parent, the demonization of the other. Now, I see the idealization, but I don't see it as flamboyantly in splitting as I see the demonization side. The demonization side is really prevalent in this pathology, as is the locked, rigid thinking of splitting. Okay, and the moment we use splitting, we get all the borderline stuff. We get the research on attachment and the neurodevelopment of the brain on splitting, and we get a whole bunch of good stuff in the research literature the moment we use the word splitting. So let's call number 3 splitting. Number 4, the independent thinker phenomena. Let's just skip this one, okay? That's Richard. We'll just move that one aside. Everybody kind of believes they have this, that they're not being influenced. Generously, we'll call it the delusion again. That the child is a delusional belief. They believe that their perception is the right way, and they're kind of locked into this delusional belief, and they're not open to alternate realities. Okay, we'll give symptom number 4 that, and then say that's what he was looking for. Lack of guilt. It's not guilt. It's a little dicey when we start moving into the moral suasions. I know what you're doing. I know what you're looking. I know what to do in the moral suasion zone. I've worked with kids in juvenile justice where they're doing stuff that's not right. Okay, there is a right and wrong. There is a morality to the world that we can kind of orient kids to. The difficulty is getting a kid to feel guilty about the way they treat a parent. That's a role reversal thing where the child's taking care of the parent's emotional needs. It just gets a little dicey. If we switch it over to empathy, the absence of empathy, it's much, much better. Now we got the capacity for human cruelty, we got the narcissistic stuff, we got the even borderline stuff, the absence of empathy. It puts us on a much, much more solider ground. In fact, I think that pathology, the absence of empathy, is the key pathology in a whole line of trauma types of pathology. And so this is one among many of the trauma pathologies that have as their core the absence of empathy. So there's that. Borrowed scenarios. Yeah, the parents, here's how the parent creates the pathology, is they invite a criticism, and then the moment they get the child to criticize the other parent, what was wrong? Is everything okay? No, you did get any arguments or fights, any problems. The moment they get a criticism, they then inflame that criticism. They incite the anger. Oh my goodness, I can't believe they treated you so badly. And in that process of incitement, the parent provides the themes for the rejection. Now the child, every time they go over to the other parent's house, the targeted parent, they have to come back from that visit and give the parent some bad criticism of the other parent. So they have to give the allied parent, how are things at your mom's house? Oh, I hated it over there. It was awful. Now they have to come up with something. So oftentimes a kid creates something at the targeted parent's house, so they'll have something to go back and talk about. So, get stories from targeted parents. Everything was fine, and all of a sudden we have this major blow. Well, the child's going back. They have to create some problem to tell. Or they have to make up one. That gets hard after a while. Or during this inflammation process, the targeted parent gives the child themes, and that's over in the associated clinical signs, is the various themes the child gets from, oh, I can't believe your dad would treat you this way. They're so selfish. He only thinks of himself. He never considered anyone else's feelings. Okay, that's the theme that is given to the child during that inflammation stage. So now the child goes to the therapist and says, oh, I hate my dad. He's so selfish. He never considers anyone else's feelings. That's the borrowed scenarios. That's what he's looking for off of that. Yeah, okay, yeah, I hear that. Going forward, that's associated clinical sign. It's not really a diagnostic indicator because it's not always there. And the way it's, people have to share the same views. It's just something that, rejection of the family. Now, that's an interesting one. I've seen it. I know what he's looking for that. It's an interesting feature, and it says something about the attachment system. I'd like, once we get this solved and I'm 20 years dead and people are actually doing research on this, it'd be interesting to look at what that says about how the attachment system works. It seems to work like a hub and wheels and spokes. So if you close the child toward the parent, you close the grandparents, you close the aunts, the uncles, and everything else. That's an interesting feature. It also has some interesting implications for how we fix things. So that's an interesting symptom. I've seen it. It's not associated with any other pathology. It's an attachment-related symptom. So it's not associated with ADHD or regulatory systems or autism, cognitive systems, or intersubjectivity or stuff. It's over on the attachment system. It's an interesting symptom. I may have missed one here or there. But essentially the point is Gardner was picking up on something. Okay, he saw something, and he was the first in. So he comes out and says, hey, look at this thing over here. So, cut him some slack. The guy's going in. He's first one in. My question is why the ones that followed didn't do a better job. Why have we been sitting around with 35 years with this nonsense? Okay, and it is nonsense. That's an awful, awful model for a diagnosis. It's awful. Okay, so I understand all the critics. Totally get it. ABPA isn't like that. Okay, I didn't. No. I'm a clinical psychologist. This is a real pathology. I'm defining it in real terms so that we can solve this, please. And one of the things, we got in a conflict from Gardner between us and the domestic violence people and the child abuse people. We're not in conflict. We're on the same side. This is a trauma pathology. This is a version of domestic violence in many cases. When we have the narcissistic dad and the brutalizing the mom, power, control, and domination, using the children as a weapon. This is very much a domestic violence form of pathology. Then you have the borderline version that has a different flavor to it. But that's over there. It's kind of on the abuse line, transgenerational abuse kind of issue going. And so it's a very real pathology we have here. And there is also child abuse. There's also authentic domestic violence. And so what I say is dogs exist and cats exist. And just because there's dogs doesn't mean there aren't cats. And just because there's cats doesn't mean there's not a dog. We just have to recognize what's a dog and what's a cat. And so we're actually on the same team. We're treating trauma. The people who are dealing with child abuse, I used to be one of those, work in the foster care system, dealing with the trauma. We're dealing with trauma today, now, in this world, in this generation. What the parental alienation people, what this pathology is a trauma a generation or two before. It's a transgenerational transmission of trauma. And so we're both in the trauma world. We are allies with the domestic violence people. We are allies with the child abuse people. And it's unfortunate that Gardner's goofy model of parental alienation syndrome divided professional psychology away from the parents who need us because they are in a trauma abusive ripple situation. So with that, I'm going to close off my take on Gardner's PAS.